mother set a manila envelope on the kitchen island and slid it toward me with 2 fingers, the way you push a check across a counter to a stranger. I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside because she'd been rehearsing this conversation for about 6 weeks, the way she rehearsed every conversation that mattered, by saying small parts of it out loud to my father in the next room and assuming I couldn't hear her through the heating vent. I was 31 years old. I had built a logistics and fulfillment company called Northbridge Freight Solutions over 13 years, starting in a converted storage unit in Toledo with a folding table, a refurbished Dell I bought off Craigslist for $200, and a flip phone with a battery that died if you looked at it wrong. By that night in the kitchen, Northbridge was clearing $4.8 million a year in revenue, with 2 warehouses, 41 employees, and contracts with 3 regional grocery chains and 1 national pharmacy distributor that I had personally driven to Indianapolis to win. My mother was looking at me the way she looked at the dog when he tracked mud in. "Your father and I have made a decision," she said. "Your sister is going to take over as CEO. You'll still have a job. We thought you could handle operations since you know the warehouse side so well. I want to tell you what happened next, but first I need you to understand the part that almost everyone gets wrong when they hear this story, because I see the same question every time I think about telling it. How? How could she give it away? How could anyone give away a company that wasn't theirs to give? Here's the part I'm not proud of. When I was 22, fresh out of community college and trying to get a $5,000 line of credit at a small bank in Slovenia, the loan officer told me I was too young and too undercapitalized to sign a loan. He suggested a cosigner. My parents had a paid-off house and a decent credit score, and my father said yes within about 4 seconds. He drove me to the bank himself. He was, at that point in my life, the only person who had ever told me I was smart in a way that sounded like he meant it. What I didn't understand, what I didn't even read carefully because I was 22 and grateful and stupid, was that the paperwork I signed structured Northbridge as a family LLC, with my parents holding a combined 51% membership interest as founding capital partners, and me holding 49% as managing member. My father drafted that structure with a lawyer named Don who used to play golf with him. I signed it on a Tuesday afternoon, in a strip mall office that smelled like old carpet, and I went home thinking I owned my company. For the next 13 years, I did own it in the only sense that mattered. I made every decision. I hired every person. I built every relationship. My parents had no operational involvement. They didn't come to the office. They didn't know the names of my warehouse managers. My mother once asked me at Easter whether Northbridge did the Amazon thing. That's the depth of her involvement. But the paperwork said what the paperwork said. And my sister, who was 2 years younger than me, had 3 children, a husband who sold residential real estate part-time, and a mortgage on a 4-bedroom in a suburb of Cleveland that my parents had quietly been helping with for about 6 years. My sister had also, in my mother's words, really pulled her life together after a divorce, which is the kind of phrase my mother used to mean needs money, but I can't say that out loud. So that's the part everybody asks. That's how. A signature I made at 22 in a strip mall on a piece of paper I trusted my father to have read for me. I want to walk you through that night because I've replayed it enough times that it plays the same way every time, like a movie I memorized. My mother slid the envelope across the island. I didn't open it. My father was standing behind her, leaning against the refrigerator with his arms folded, the way he stood whenever he was about to deliver something he'd decided was non-negotiable. My sister wasn't there. That detail matters. My sister wasn't there because, as I found out later, she had already known for 2 months. She'd been in 3 planning meetings with my parents and Don, the family lawyer, while I was driving back and forth to a new distribution center we were opening in Cincinnati. My father said, "You're going to work under your sister now. She deserves this. She has 3 kids and she's struggling, and you don't have that kind of life. You'll figure it out. You always do." That last part, you always do. That last part, you always do. He said it like a compliment. He said it the way you'd say it to a horse before you whipped it. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you because I've watched enough of these stories to know that the woman in them always cries and then walks out with her chin up, and that's not how it actually went for me. I didn't cry because I genuinely couldn't feel anything yet. There's a particular kind of shock where the part of your brain that handles emotion just clicks off, like a breaker tripping, and you stand there feeling almost amused, almost curious about what's going to come out of your mouth. What came out of my mouth was, okay. That was it. One word. My mother's face did this thing where she was clearly disappointed that I hadn't given her the fight she'd been preparing for. She'd wanted me to argue so that she could deliver the line she'd rehearsed in front of the heating vent. She had a whole speech ready about family and sacrifice and how blood was thicker than business. I didn't give her the chance. I picked up my purse, I walked out the side door, and I sat in my Honda Pilot in the driveway for about 11 minutes before I could remember how to drive. I went home. I poured a glass of cheap Pinot Grigio I had in the fridge. I sat on my couch in the dark with the wine in my lap, and I did the math. The math, for me, was never about the company name. The math was about what could actually be taken from me, and what couldn't. They could take the LLC. They could take the trade name Northbridge Freight Solutions. They could take the office on Reynolds Road, the lease on the second warehouse, the 8 company trucks, the website domain, the logo I paid a freelancer $600 for in 2014. They could take the line of credit and the corporate bank accounts. What they couldn't take was that I personally knew the buying manager at every one of our 4 major clients. They couldn't take that I had been the person who flew to Indianapolis in a snowstorm to save the pharmacy contract when one of our trucks jackknifed on I-71. They couldn't take that my warehouse manager in Toledo, a man named Russell who had been with me for 9 years, had once told me at a Christmas party that he'd follow me to a different company if I ever started one. They couldn't take my contracts in my head, the routing systems I'd designed, the relationships, the trust. They couldn't take my name. My actual name. Not Northbridge, mine. I want to tell you what my father said next and what happened the morning after and how I rebuilt everything in 5 months. But first, just so I know who's listening, where are you watching from right now and what time is it for you? I'm asking because this story has reached a lot of women who told me they were sitting in their cars in parking lots, trying to figure out whether to go back inside to their own version of this kitchen. I want to know where you are. The morning after the kitchen, I called Dawn, the family lawyer. I made the call from a Speedway parking lot off Monroe Street at 6:45 in the morning because I'd been awake all night and I wanted to hear how he was going to lie to me. He didn't lie. He told me in the careful voice lawyers use when they know they're delivering news that should have been delivered 14 years ago that I had 2 options. I could litigate. I could try to argue undue influence at the time of formation mismanagement, anything that would let me unwind the LLC structure. He said it would take 18 to 36 months and cost between $300,000 and $700,000, and the outcome was, in his words, genuinely uncertain. Or I could walk away clean and start something new. And the only thing I needed to be careful about was a non-compete clause that my father had inserted into my managing member agreement in 2017 when I'd agreed to update some paperwork without really reading it. The non-compete prohibited me from operating a freight or logistics business in the state of Ohio for 2 years following my voluntary departure. I asked him about the word voluntary departure. I asked him about the word voluntary. He paused. Don is 68 years old, and he has known me since I was a teenager. He paused for a long time. Then he said, if they removed you from your role and you didn't agree to the change, that wouldn't be voluntary. You'd want that in writing. I drove from the Speedway to my office. I got there before anyone else, which was normal because I was always the first one in. I sat at my desk for about an hour just looking at it. Then I wrote a single email to my mother, my father, and the email address Dawn had given me as the official record for the LLC. The email said, per our conversation last night, I understand that effective immediately I am being removed from my position as CEO and managing member of Northbridge Freight Solutions and being demoted to operations manager under the new CEO, my sister. I do not consent to this change in role and consider it an involuntary termination of my position. I will be collecting my personal belongings today. I copied Dawn. I copied my own personal attorney, a woman named Ruth I'd hired that morning at 5:15 by leaving a voicemail. I hit send. Then I started packing. I want to tell you that I felt powerful in that moment. I didn't. I felt like a woman packing a cardboard box, because that's what I was. I put my framed picture of my late grandmother, the one who'd given me her wedding ring when I was 19 and told me to sell it if I ever needed to start something, into a banker's box. I put a coffee mug a client had sent me from Indianapolis. I put 2 notebooks full of handwritten routing schedules that, technically, I probably shouldn't have taken, but my name was on every page and I decided that morning that anything with my handwriting on it was mine. I left my keys on the desk. I left the company laptop. I left the corporate credit card in the top drawer. I did not leave my phone. My phone had every single client contact, every supplier, every driver, every relationship I built in 13 years. My phone was personally owned on a personal plan because I'd never gotten around to switching to a company phone. That was either luck or some deep instinct I'd been protecting without knowing it. Russell, my warehouse manager, was in the loading bay when I walked out with my box. He looked at me, looked at the box, and didn't say anything. He just nodded. I told him I'd call him in a week. I meant it. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table and I opened a new Google Doc. At the top of the document, I typed 3 words. Not Northbridge, mine. I didn't pick the name that day. I'm telling you, because people always assume I had the new company ready to go, like I'd been planning my escape. I hadn't. I'd been running Northbridge like it was going to be the thing I did for the rest of my life. But I knew what I wanted the new name to sound like, even before I picked the words. I wanted it to sound like the kind of company that pharmacy chains and grocery chains and hospital systems would trust to move expensive cold chain product across 3 states in February. I wanted it to sound expensive. I wanted it to sound like adults ran it. The name I eventually settled on 3 days later was Iron Line Distribution. No family name, no cute branding, no reference to anything personal. I had a friend in Columbus who did logos, and I paid her $1,500 for a word mark and a small ironwork-style monogram. And I had a website up in 9 days using a template a younger cousin walked me through. But the website didn't matter. What mattered was the phone calls. I want to walk you through the first phone call, because it was the one that taught me what was actually about to happen. The buying manager for the pharmacy distributor, a man named Charles, had been my main contact for 6 years. We had dinner 3 times at a steakhouse in Indianapolis. I knew his wife's name and the name of the daughter who was about to go to Ohio State. He answered on the second ring, which he always did, because Charles was the kind of man who treated his phone like an extension of his job. I told him plainly that I had left Northbridge. I didn't tell him why. I told him I was starting a new operation called Iron Line Distribution, that I would personally be running it, and that I wanted him to know in advance because his next contract renewal with Northbridge was coming up in 7 months, and I wanted to be honest about my situation. Charles was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then he said, "Are you taking Russell with you?" I told him I didn't know yet. He said, "When you know, call me back. I'm not signing anything for 7 months without knowing where you are." That was the first phone call. I made 43 more like it over the next 9 days. I called every contact I had, every buying manager, every operations director, every dispatcher at every client, and every major supplier. I told them I had left. I told them what I was building. I did not badmouth my family. I did not tell anyone what had happened in the kitchen. I made a deliberate choice, sitting at that table in the dark on the first night, that I was not going to be the woman whose story was about her family. I was going to be the woman whose story was about her work. By day 11, I had soft commitments from 3 of the 4 major clients to move with me when their contracts came up for renewal. The 4th, the grocery chain in Pittsburgh, was non-committal but didn't say no. By day 22, Russell called me on a Saturday morning. He said, "When are we starting?" He'd already typed up his 2 weeks' notice. He brought 4 other people with him over the next month, including my best dispatcher and a driver named Hector, who had been the first person I ever hired in 2012. This is the part of the story I think people don't understand when they hear it as a story about revenge. It wasn't revenge. I was not sitting at my kitchen table at night drinking wine and plotting my sister's downfall. I was building a company. I was working 16-hour days. I was driving to meetings in Cleveland and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh in the same Honda Pilot, with sample contracts and a portable printer in the back seat, because I couldn't afford an assistant yet and I refused to look like I was struggling. I leased a small warehouse outside Findlay, Ohio, which technically put me 43 miles from Northbridge's territory, And also, more importantly, on the wrong side of a county line for the way the non-compete had been written. Ruth, my personal lawyer, reviewed every single decision. She told me that even if my family tried to enforce the non-compete, they would have a very hard time doing it because of the involuntary termination and because of two procedural mistakes my father had made when he updated the paperwork in 2017. Their best move was to leave me alone and hope I failed. They did not leave me alone. 2 months after I left, I got a letter from Dawn, on official Northbridge letterhead, demanding that I cease and desist all operations of Iron Line distribution. The letter was not signed by my father. It was signed by my sister in her capacity as CEO. That was the first time I felt anything sharp. Not when my mother slid the envelope. Not when my father said, "You always do." But when I saw my sister's signature on a piece of letterhead that had my logo on it, the Northbridge logo I designed with the freelancer in 2014, I gave the letter to Ruth. Ruth wrote a 6-page response that I will summarize for you in one sentence. The response said, essentially, "We will see you in court, and when we do, you will pay our legal fees." They did not file. They never filed. I think that's because Don, who is a careful man, told them what would happen if they did. What I didn't know yet, what nobody had told me, was what was happening inside Northbridge. My sister, whose name is Caroline, had never run anything in her life. She'd worked as a real estate office manager for 4 years and as a substitute teacher before that. She walked into Northbridge with 3 children and a husband and the certainty, instilled by my mother, that she deserved this and would figure it out the way you did. She did not figure it out. The first thing that happened was that the pharmacy distributor, Charles's company, did not renew their contract when it came up. They went with a competitor for 1 quarter, and then they came to me. Iron Line signed our first major contract 11 weeks after I'd left Northbridge. It was worth about $1.1 million in annual revenue. I sat in my car in the parking lot of Charles's office building in Indianapolis after I signed it, and I called my mother. I don't know why. I called her and I said, "I signed Charles today." She said, "Charles who?" She didn't know the names. She had never known the names. She had spent 13 years assuming the company ran itself, because the daughter she'd given it to was the kind of person who made things run. The second thing that happened was that Russell, my warehouse manager, was replaced at Northbridge by a man named Brad who was a friend of my sister's husband. Brad had managed a Home Depot for 2 years and had no logistics experience. Within 6 weeks, Northbridge had its first major shipping error in 4 years, when a refrigerated truck carrying $23,000 worth of vaccines from a supplier to a regional hospital network went off temperature for 9 hours because nobody had set the trailer's reefer unit correctly. The hospital network canceled the contract and filed an insurance claim. The third thing that happened was that my father, who had inserted himself as chairman of the board on the day I left, started showing up at the office. He didn't know how anything worked. He started giving orders to dispatchers about routes he didn't understand. He fired 2 drivers because they had attitudes, which is the phrase men of his generation use when a woman tells them they're wrong. He hired his nephew, my cousin, to run accounts payable. My cousin, who had a gambling problem nobody talked about, lasted 6 weeks. I want to tell you that I was watching all of this happen and rubbing my hands together. I wasn't. I was running Iron Line. I was hiring. I was signing leases. I was driving to Pittsburgh once a week to court the grocery chain. I heard about Northbridge in pieces from former employees who'd quit and called me to ask if I was hiring. From suppliers we shared. From Charles, who called me one Tuesday afternoon and said, "I just want you to know your old company is on fire." 5 months after the night in the kitchen, my mother called me. I want to be specific about what I mean by called. She did not text, she did not email, she did not send a card. She called my cell phone on a Saturday morning in October at 8:43 in the morning. I was at a farmer's market in Findlay with a paper cup of coffee in my hand, looking at a pumpkin. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. The voicemail was 42 seconds long. I am going to paraphrase it because I have it saved, but I'm not going to paraphrase it because I have it saved. She said that things at Northbridge weren't going the way we'd hoped. She said that my sister was overwhelmed and that my father was trying his best but not getting through to her. She said that there was a possibility the bank was going to call the line of credit because of some missed covenant on a quarterly filing. She said she thought it would be a good time for us to have a family dinner. A family dinner? I deleted the voicemail. I bought the pumpkin. I drove home. 3 days later, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail. 2 days after that, my sister called me. I let it go to voicemail too. Then on a Wednesday evening, all three of them showed up at my house. I'd moved in August into a small ranch on a quiet street in Finlay, partly because I wanted to be near the new warehouse and partly because I didn't want to live in the same city as my parents anymore. I had not given them the address. They had gotten it from a cousin. My mother knocked. My father stood behind her with his hands in his coat pockets. My sister Caroline was on the bottom step, holding a casserole. I want you to picture that. She was holding a casserole, like we were having a normal Wednesday. I opened the door. I did not let them in. I stood in my own doorway in a sweatshirt and leggings, with my hair in a bun, and I looked at the three of them. My mother started to speak. I held up one finger. I said, "Before any of you say anything, I want you to understand something. I am not going back. I am not buying Northbridge. I am not bailing out the line of credit. I am not under any circumstances working under my sister. I have one business now and it is mine and it has a different name." My father said, "We came here to apologize." I looked at him. I have known this man my entire life. I know what his apologies sound like. He has apologized to me exactly 3 times in 31 years, and each one of them was structured as a transaction. I said, "Then apologize." The 4 of us stood there for a long moment in the cold, in my doorway in October, with a casserole between us. My sister started crying first. My mother, second. My father did not cry. He just looked at me, and then he looked down at his shoes, and then he said the only thing he has ever said to me that I have replayed more than once. He said, "I thought you'd be okay. I want to tell you that I forgave him on the spot." I didn't. I told them that if they wanted to talk, they could come back the next Saturday at noon, and they would come without a casserole, and they would come with a written list, on paper, of every decision they had made in the last 14 years that had affected my life and my company. I told them I wasn't interested in apologies that didn't have specifics in them. They came back. They brought a list. It was 4 pages long in my mother's handwriting, because she had been the one to write it. The list included the loan paperwork in 2012. It included the family LLC structure. It included a moment I've forgotten in 2015 when my mother told a major client at a Christmas party that I was getting too big for my britches. It included the non-compete in 2017. It included the meetings with Don over the summer that I hadn't been invited to. It included Caroline knowing for 2 months. It included the kitchen, the envelope, the words my father said. It did not include everything, but it included enough. I read the list at my kitchen table while the 3 of them sat there. I did not let them speak. When I finished reading it, I put it down. I looked at my sister, who had her hands wrapped around a coffee cup I'd given her, and I said, "What do you want, Caroline?" She said, "I want to know what we should do." I told her what to do. I told her that the right thing for her to do was to step down as CEO of Northbridge and put the company into a controlled wind-down with a turnaround consultant I knew in Columbus. I told her that the line of credit was going to get called whether they liked it or not, and that the best thing she could do for her 3 children was to walk away with whatever assets she could salvage instead of writing it into bankruptcy. I told her that I was not going to hire her at Iron Line, but that I would write her a personal letter of recommendation for an operations role somewhere else, because she was actually good with people and bad with systems. And the right job for her existed and was not the one our parents had given her. I told my parents that I was not interested in being part of their lives in the way I had been before. I told them I would see them at Christmas and Easter and on birthdays, and that they could come to my house twice a year on those days, and that beyond that, my life was my own. I told my mother that I was not going to argue with her about it. I told my father that the next time he wanted to tell me I'd be okay, he could keep it to himself. I told them all that the difference between inheritance and a real business is that one of them gets handed to you and the other one gets built, and that whatever else they thought they knew about me, They had not understood that distinction, and it had cost them a company. That was a year and a half ago. Ironline cleared $3.2 million in revenue in its first full year. We're projected at 5.8 this year. Russell runs the Finley warehouse. Hector still drives, but I made him a senior driver trainer, and he runs all the new hire road tests. Charles signed a 3-year contract with us in March. Northbridge folded in February. The line of credit was called. The assets were liquidated. My father lost most of the equity in their house, which had been pledged against the loan. My parents moved to a smaller place in a different suburb. My sister got a job at a property management company in Akron, and the last time I saw her at our cousin's wedding in May, she told me it was the first job she had ever taken that she had gotten on her own. I have not forgiven my mother. I want to be honest about that. I see her at the holidays. I do not call her on Sundays the way I used to. I love her, in the way you love a person who shaped you. But I do not trust her, and I think those are different things, and I think a lot of people get into trouble by pretending they're the same. The moment that changed my life wasn't the envelope on the island. It wasn't the kitchen. It wasn't even the day Charles signed his contract. The moment was the first night on my couch in the dark with the cheap wine in my lap. When I did the math and figured out what they could and couldn't take. They could take the name. They could take the building. They could take the building. They could take the trucks. They could not take what I had actually built, because what I had actually built was inside my own head. And inside the relationships I'd spent 13 years earning, one phone call at a time. That's the part nobody tells you about a family that tries to take your work. They cannot take your work. They can only take the parts of it that have their name on the paperwork. The rest, the part that matters, walks out the side door with you, sits in the Honda Pilot in the driveway for 11 minutes, and drives home. I fought a lot about what actually happened in that kitchen, and I want to be careful because the easy version of the story is the one where my mother is a villain and my sister is a fool and I'm the hero who walked out with my head high. That version is not true. The true version is more useful, and it took me almost a year to see it clearly. My parents did what they did because, somewhere along the way, they had quietly decided that the rules of love and the rules of business were the same rules. They believed that a company was something you could pass around a dinner table the way you pass a serving dish, because they had never built one, and people who have never built something genuinely don't understand what they're holding. That isn't an excuse for what they did, but it is, I think, the cause. And when you understand a cause, you stop being a victim of it. Caroline did what she did because she had been taught, since she was a small girl, that her worth was measured in what she received and not in what she made. That's a particular kind of damage, and I watched it nearly destroy her at 33. The mercy in the story is that losing Northbridge forced her to find out who she actually was, which turned out to be a woman who was genuinely good at managing people and genuinely bad at running systems she didn't design. She is happier now than she was the night she sat at our parents' table planning to take my company. Cause and effect, working slowly. What I learned, and what I want anyone listening to hear, is that the 3 things you actually own in this life are your character, your judgment, and your willingness to keep going when the easy thing would be to quit. Everything else is paperwork. Everything else can be taken with the signature you made when you were 22 and trusted the wrong person to read the document for you. Your character cannot be taken. Your judgment, if you keep using it, only sharpens. And your willingness to keep going is the muscle that gets stronger every time you choose to use it instead of collapsing. The temptation, when you've been hurt like this, is to become hard, to stop trusting anyone, to turn your home into a fortress and your relationships into transactions. I tried that for about 3 weeks and I hated who I was becoming. So I made a different choice. I decided to keep being someone who picks up the phone when Charles calls, who pays Russell what he's worth, who answers the door when her parents knock with a casserole, even when she doesn't let them inside. I decided that the people who hurt me would not also get to take the part of me that knew how to love people well. That's the part I want you to keep. The work is yours. The relationships are yours. The mornings and the late nights and the cheap glass of wine in the dark and the 11 minutes in the driveway when you can't remember how to drive. All of that is yours. Nobody can sign it away. Not even the people who taught you how to sign your name in the first place.